Hey everybody, this is King Kong 100, and today I have the absolute honor of having a chat with Marie Anello, who has many different talents, but is notorious in the kaiju community for writing the legendary monsterverse graphic novel Kingdom Kong. Marie, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Notorious. I like that. I'm gonna put that on my business card.
Yeah. I wanted to start off by kind of just acknowledging how incredibly talented and versatile you are with your career and what you do, because you write incredible stories, you're a singer and songwriter, you participate in opera, you're into musical theater, drama, you're a story writer, editor. I can go on and virtually extend this interview to an hour, but your career is just so incredibly multifaceted. And how are you able to manage so many of these talents and skills? How do you juggle all these incredible things?
I mean, there's a lot of different ways to go about doing it. I think like at the core of it, for me, like there was a while where I kind of was like, well, I'm gonna have to choose one, right? Because there's no way that I can do all of it. And um I just have found that I really can't divide myself between my writing and my performing. They're just both huge facets of who I am, and they feed into each other. And as far as managing it goes, really it's just trying to recognize when a thing that I want to do is going to be expressed either through writing or through performing. Because, obviously, like as an actor, sometimes you're performing other people's material, but even like, taking time and recognizing, okay, I have an idea. I want to express it. Is this going to be a comic? Is this going to be prose, or does it need to be performed? And like I'm actually like right now developing a cabaret just because I realized like I want to express something that I'm feeling emotionally, and the best way to do that is going to be with music. And
Hmm.
just trying to honor those impulses, which is like it takes a lot of time learning to like trust that impulse and not assume that it's better to just do what everybody else is telling you to do. It takes a lot of just time and learning to trust yourself.
I see. Um, so because you mentioned that these careers or these kind of skills seem to kind of seep into one another, like one experience from your musical theater leaks into your story writing or inspires that. So you would say that you kind of tend to draw inspiration from one thing you do to another?
Absolutely. My interests inform my writing, and I tend to explore a lot of the same themes, whether I'm writing for comics or, writing for the stage. I feel like the one of the nice things about being in theater, and especially with my opera training, is it's given me a big love for history. And you learn very quickly that none of that exists in a vacuum. Like stories have been told for generations, and whatever medium they're told in, whether it's on stage or in an illustrated book, um, there are themes and qualities to them that I am attracted to. And I find that generally if I'm in a show and there's some facet of that show that I find really interesting, it'll inevitably find its way into my writing somehow.
Hmm. And that's basically what helps elevate what you're creating to the new level. Like that's what makes your craft more personal and more you, right?
Thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of that also is just learning to tell, like, even though this is technically a monster story, it's a human story, and learning to tell human stories from a place of, empathy and emotional honesty, I think is a big way to elevate anything you're working on, just because you're focusing on emotions that people can relate to.
Hmm. Now, when you were given the honor of writing for an iconic character like Kong, was there any sort of intimidation when it came to that? Were you kind of worried about how the story might be perceived by other people?
Oh God, yes. Oh my God, yes. No, I'd never worked with a big IP before. And people care so much about Kong and about kaiju and Godzilla.
Yeah,
And,
tell me about it.
yeah, and I really wanted to do honor by them, and I wanted to tell a story that they'd like. And because I am still an early career writer. I before Godzilla versus Kong, I had only been in like a comics anthology, and then I'd done a lot of like comics journalism. So this became this huge thing where I was like, oh my God, this isn't one of my like personal projects that I'm just noodling away at in secrecy, like people are going to see this and have opinions about it. And there's a movie tie-in. And like it was very intimidating. I it it was a very crazy process to get onboarded into, because again, like I'd never worked with an IP before, and everybody else who I was working with, obviously, like all the people at Legendary do that for a living.
Mhm.
So, they're just like, oh yeah, we're gonna hook you up with the mythology department. I'm like, there's a mythology department?
Yeah, I
So
was pretty
yeah.
surprised seeing that too. I was like, "Oh, that's so cool! Imagine being able to make monsters for a living." Like, I
I
would.
know, right? Yeah, I've had several of my friends basically be like, how do I get that job?
Right, yeah. So, how did you find ways to kind of get around the intimidation? I mean, I imagine you had like a really nice moral support system.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was very fortunate that like my editors were great. Robert Napton and Nikita Kanakanti were super responsive and wonderful. And they were my main contacts. They were sort of the middlemen between me and like the film team and everything. Um, the at the beginning, it was very much like, okay, I have to do right by this. How do I get over this like huge intimidating project? And a lot of it was doing my own research, just taking time to like look into as much as I could about this specific version of Kong as well as previous ones. And
Hmm.
also, over time, and we can talk about this more, but like over time, like realizing that even though this was part of a larger story, this was its own narrative. This was its own little self-contained story. And rather than worrying about how it was going to affect the larger narrative, I had to just focus it on it being a good story. And then at the end of the day, you're working with the thing in front of you, and it doesn't seem quite as daunting.
Right. Yeah. I definitely think that you shined a lot in this when writing this comic because while like yes, it takes place in the MonsterVerse continuity, it really does shine as its own story. So I think you did an incredible job with that.
Thank you.
Of course. Um, so regarding your career up to this point, what
Mhm.
led you to want to like pursue writing as a career, and what led you to cross paths with Legendary in creating a King Kong story?
So I've always written stories ever since I was a kid. I think I had about like 8 different like baby novels that I started writing when I was like, 12, 13, 14 that all like eventually fell by the wayside.
Wow.
But I've always written, and at a certain point I realized, because I've always read comics as well, I realized that people wrote comics and you could pair with artists and make comics. And so
Hmm.
at first it was more or less just like a personal thing. Like I started out doing comics reviews because I just loved comics. I loved sort of analyzing them and telling people about like new web comics and artists that I really liked. And then I started collaborating with my partner Liz Parlett, just for fun. And then over time, more and more, we were like, well, we have all these ideas and we have all these concepts, and we should just do it. We should just make them.
Yeah,
And
just go for it.
yeah, and like I didn't entirely make the decision like, oh, I want to be a comics writer for a living. Um, but then suddenly like I was getting that work, and it was really exciting because it's like, oh, this is maybe one of my favorite ways to tell a story, because you have to factor in all of these visuals, and it's so collaborative, and you're working with artists and colorists and letterers, and you're creating this it's funny, like the word for opera literally means the work, because when opera was created, it was supposed to be a combination of all theater on in one thing. And
Oh,
I feel
really?
like that's what comics are for writing. And for visuals, it is this beautiful amalgamation of all these different talents. And so I really love that process. I love that collaboration. So to get back on topic, I had gotten a book agent, through my work with Liz. And then he reached out to me because Legendary had put out a call they wanted to audition new writers for this project. Specifically, they wanted a female writer because they didn't have any on their roster, and they knew that the main character was going to be a woman. And Nikita Kanakanti, who was the editor on this, already knew my work, but didn't know that I was represented. So
Mhm.
then when my agent put my name and my resume in front of them, Nikita reached out and was like, we'd love to see a pitch. And then ultimately, I mean, I have no idea who else was involved in that audition, but like ultimately Nikita liked my pitch. And I will also say that that pitch was based off of a 2 sentence, like fully redacted, like, and I had to sign an NDA just to see the like 2 sentence prompt in order to write this pitch. And I had
Wow.
no idea like how it was going to fit into the larger franchise.
Mhm.
But based off of that, they hired me, and it was mind boggling.
No, I can't even imagine. So that's incredible though.
Thank
Um
you.
yeah, I think you were the perfect choice in penning a King Kong story.
Thank
Um
you.
yeah, so as like an an avid King Kong fan, one of my favorite characters in honestly any of his stories is definitely Audrey Burns. I feel like she was a very interesting character because she suffered from a lot of PTSD,
Mhm.
almost losing somebody she loves because of her. She was super like determined and super headstrong, and
Mhm.
we see that this trauma kind of haunts her throughout the entire story. So I'm very curious, like, what led you to write this particular kind of character as opposed to other kinds of characters we typically see within this monster genre? Like, what inspired you to write a character like Audrey Burns?
It's interesting because like parts of Audrey were already baked into the concept when I was brought on. Like they knew they wanted a female pilot to be the lead of this. And in the initial, like, I can't talk too much about the behind the scenes, but like in the initial pitch, they were like, oh, we want kind of like this, exploratory, like Neil Armstrong landing on the moon and all of this stuff, because so much of this had to do with introducing more about the hollow earth, because that was going to be such a big part of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And my initial approach to Audrey was very different from the final product. But over time, as we went through, like, I think the treatment went through like 6 or 7 revisions. And over time, what I started to realize with Audrey and what I wanted to explore was like a really, I wanted to explore like what was the realistic reaction to being a person faced with this kind of cataclysm. I
Right.
really wanted to explore someone who isn't excited about Titans, isn't like happy that they exist necessarily. Like this is someone who has suffered a great deal. And a lot of Audrey is inspired in a lot of ways from like anime, because I am still a big anime fan. And something that I've always found very compelling are characters who start out very kind of either happy go lucky or very sort of like plucky and self-assured, who then have to reckon with the consequences of their actions and come out eventually like more mature and stronger for it. And I really wanted to explore as realistic as I could a portrayal of someone who is reckoning with that level of trauma and that level of guilt, because so much of her story is wrapped up in not only the experience of like facing down a titan and seeing absolutely awful things happen, like you see in these movies that so many innocent people die,
Yeah.
but then also the idea that you are in a position where you can actually do something, but what can you do against something this big and terrifying? So I really like that really took me to where I ended up with Audrey, and in also trying to kind of align her with Kong in their character arcs within this story and trying to find themes that would connect them. I ultimately ended up at this place of sort of radical empathy, because Audrey is able to accept and grow from this experience because she feels supported. And I kind of wanted to I wanted to really stick that landing with regards to like her team and her relationship with Tam, but also have that through line be present because ultimately Kong also has to go through that same lesson both in this and in Godzilla versus Kong. I really wanted that to be an emotional through line to connect this to the movie.
Yeah, no, I actually noticed the connection between Audrey and Kong. And that was actually one of my questions was that connection intentional? So
Yeah,
I take it that it
absolutely.
was.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because as I mentioned before, originally I had Audrey was much more did not want to ally like in earlier versions. I remember thinking like, okay, well, all of the heroes of these things are like, oh yeah, let them fight. Thank you, Watanabe sensei. But no, but like very much this sort of thing where it's like, oh well, the monsters are our friends and they're our protectors. And I really wanted a character who was like, no, absolutely not. I do not trust these things. They are not human. And that didn't really work with what the story ended up being. But what I came to instead, rather than having her be like diametrically opposed to Kong, was I realized like, oh, they're similar. Like they're both these very like headstrong, stubborn, lone wolf types, and they don't know how to ask for help. And
Mhm.
realizing that gave me a lot of like insight into not only how I could tie these themes together, but then also ultimately like the core message of this comic where she ultimately like helps him, and that aid is what ends up being able to um carry the day. I didn't want to make it seem as though Kong is not capable, because obviously he is a enormous monster ape and is clearly capable. But more than anything, like I wanted this to be a story about cooperation and allyship, because that is ultimately what he does, what he finds with Godzilla. Like, he's able to put aside like an eons long, like multi-species grudge in order to find an ally in Godzilla. And I kind of wanted to sort of give a little prologue of that in his collaboration with Audrey.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it was just such an excellent thing seeing. It's a very rare thing to find within this genre, such a um tightly knit together story between monster and human. And yeah, that's just one of the things I really admire about this story. So um yeah. When you were penning this story, how did you take the given character of Kong that you had in the MonsterVerse so far and decide to expand upon him? Like, what were the ideas going
That's
on in your mind?
Yeah, well, and like so that's actually really interesting because so some of the characterization of Kong was given to me by the mythology department and like the film team and everything. In that they were like, because I did watch Skull Island,
Hmm.
and I was sort of like, so where is he at this point in his development? And they're like, he's like grizzled and hardened, and he's like, much more of a like of an adult now, and he's very tired. I remember tired came up, like he's exhausted.
Hmm.
And I really wanted to explore that, the idea that, he has lived his entire life in battle, but it's also been in a very small microcosm. And I really like where I came to it, because now Kong is like an adult of his species, but he has no other adults to emulate. He hasn't been raised in like the I don't know if Kongs really have a culture per se, but like, he hasn't been raised within the like family unit that he would have had otherwise. And I wanted to explore that loneliness. I really wanted to explore um what living like that does to you. Like he's so good at killing things, but then at the same time, he is not naturally inclined to kill things. That was something that also they explained, the mythology team explained to me, that you have Titans in this universe are kind of classified either as, you know, protectors or destroyers, and not necessarily of people, but of like the world. That you
Hmm.
have Titans who are just, they inherently create destruction, whereas others who kind of protect a natural balance. And Kong is very elemental in that way. Like, he's called, he's considered a god on Skull Island because he does maintain that balance. So what happens when that balance is interrupted, because he's literally outgrowing that space. And the outgrowing thing was also another thing where all of this had to be tied in with where he starts out at the beginning of the movie. And so much of it, they were like, he's going to leave Skull Island. That's a huge thing because it's his home. And like, in building to that, in building to him and eventually leaving, I wanted to explore the idea that like you can never really go home again. Like you get to a certain point and you are going to outgrow what raised you. And so I really wanted to try to explore that as best I could. And ultimately that brought me to a place where he is very alone and has a lot of questions, but also is now, like by the end of the story, aware that there are other Titans that are bigger than him and malicious. And, obviously he's been fighting skull crawlers his whole life, but like Camazotz is even bigger than that. And, eventually leading up to Godzilla, there are these creatures out there that he either he either has to fight or be picked off by.
Yeah, and so because you bring up the mythology department and kind of like how they they give you some ideas regarding what's going to happen
Mm-hmm.
in future entries. Um, when it came to this story, did you have complete creative control and go, I want Kong to be characterized like this, or did you kind of have to stray very closely in line with how he'd be portrayed in Godzilla versus Kong?
Yeah, the latter.
Yeah.
Like I definitely had creative control over certain things, but especially when you're working with an IP and with a character as iconic as Kong, I definitely had to, everything had to be in service of setting up for the movie. And so um anything that I did was going to have to be in line with that characterization and also be in line with sort of the larger continuity of like Kong from Skull Island through Birth of Kong, through this, up through Godzilla versus Kong. Like it had to feel cohesive. And with Kong, like with his characterization, I didn't have I didn't have any problems really. Like I never was going to have him be super out of character for Kong, but it was
Mm.
still something that I really at the end of the day, I had to think, okay, where does he have to end up in order to set up for the movie? And so that was something that I had to really like consider in exploring this while also um, sort of meeting the needs of the narrative itself, of like that initial pitch of, there's a female pilot, there's like, a monster attacks Skull Island,
Uh-huh.
Kong fights it, like that kind of basic skeleton.
Right. And so we talked about how Audrey Burns kind of went through a lot during her development from your initial
Mhm.
pitch to the final product. Um, so if you can talk about it, I'm curious, was there anything you wanted to do with the character of Kong or the story initially but couldn't? Did Kong change a lot through development?
Kong didn't know. I mean, I can't go into like all of the specifics of the revision process, but what I can say is that like, so yeah, the pitch, as I mentioned, or rather the treatment went through like 6 or 7 revisions where there were certain elements of the story that would get introduced and then cut out, or characters were introduced and then cut out. I was also writing, like I was brought on to write before the movie had finished filming. And if you've ever worked in any kind of film or TV, there are revisions happening to that all the time. So if
Uh-huh.
there was any kind of revision to the film script or or anything like that, I had, if it affected the book, I had to account for that. So I will say that the final product is not what I originally intended, but there was nothing that I was really like heartbroken about. And in fact, I'm really quite pleased with where the core story ended up. What I can say, and I think is just fun, like 2 smaller things that I really had wanted to include and just couldn't, was I really wanted to include either a scene or a reference to Aaron Brooks, Houston Brooks's son, because I've seen a
Yes.
lot of people be like, "Where's Aaron? Why isn't Aaron in
Yeah.
this book?" And I'm like, guys, I wanted him so bad. I
Yeah.
remember trying to be like, where's a scene that I can put him in, or can I have Houston reference him? But ultimately, because this is like a 70-page book, just I had to kill my darlings, and I really had to cut as much that just didn't serve that core plot. And and it wouldn't have made sense for him to be with the pilots, and it wouldn't have made sense for him to be on the ground with the drill team, and so he got cut. And the other big thing that I really wanted to include, and again, there was just nowhere that it would fit, and I tried to shoehorn it in so many places and it just wouldn't fit, is I really wanted to make a reference to the Broadway King Kong musical with the
Oh
big
wow.
puppet.
Yeah.
It won a Tony for the big puppet, and I remember it was like, I'm gonna find a way to like make a reference to it. Like maybe in this universe it isn't a King Kong musical, but it's some kind of like Titan musical, or something. And
Right.
it just didn't work, especially once the tone got a little bit more like once I started dealing with like themes of trauma and PTSD. I was like, oh, this isn't
Yeah.
gonna fit anywhere.
Yeah, just have like a musical just show up in the middle of like Audrey's poor
Right.
trauma. No,
Exactly.
that is so funny that you brought up Aaron Brooks, because I remember rereading the comic for like the 30th time, and I was like, where is Aaron during all of this? Like he was such a big part of Bertha Kong, and now he's just gone. Like there's, as far
Yeah.
as
No,
I
and
know,
that's
yeah.
yeah, I mean, and I don't think that this is a yeah, I mean, like they wanted one of the things that did happen is they were like, oh, we'd love it if Houston Brooks was in this. And I was like, okay, we can include Houston Brooks in this. What about his son? Maybe we can have a scene between them. And it was just like, let's just focus on Houston. And I
Hmm.
was like, okay, that's fine. And yeah, like that's the sort of thing where, especially when it comes to working with a franchise like this where you have so many characters, um there's a lot of there's a lot of different direction, or rather there's a lot of different like input
Hmm.
coming from different places. And as a writer of something like this, it was my job to sort of synthesize all of that into a cohesive story.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, I remember, so I remember reading that, you're doing your own thing in your career, and then you're given this opportunity to write a King Kong story for Legendary, which is
Hmm.
amazing. And you make your pitch, and once you get the job, how did you prepare for writing this story? I know we talked about it a little bit earlier, but
Hmm.
did you watch any King Kong media beforehand, or re-watch all the MonsterVerse movies?
So I did watch Godzilla, not Godzilla versus Kong. That wasn't out yet. I did watch
Yeah.
Kong Skull Island because I really, because this took place on Skull Island, I wanted to get a sense of what it was like. I wanted to get a sense of how it was being characterized, because obviously Skull Island of this is not the same as Skull Island from the Peter Jackson movie or from the original film. And I have seen both the original Godzilla and the original King Kong. I didn't I you know I could have gone through and like rewatched every like Godzilla and Kong property, but that way lies madness. And I needed to write the thing. So
Yeah.
what I really focused on was doing a lot of my own research. I was using like Gojipedia a lot to like just cross
Yeah.
reference things. And they did send me the Birth of Kong comics to read, because they were like, this is a good place to give you an idea of like what we've done in the past. And then the big thing that they provided for me at Legendary was they sent me the shooting script of King of the Monsters and then Godzilla versus Kong. And so I read both of those. And the idea, like, I went through, I remember, and I made a bunch of notes about different, especially because like stuff for the Monsterverse, there's so many like continuity specific things to this universe, like the orca device and the hollow earth and all of that
Yeah.
stuff. I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole, like just researching real world hollow earth theory,
Oh
which then
my
I was like,
God.
I don't need this.
Yeah.
This isn't.
Get it?
Yeah.
That's definitely a rabbit hole. Yeah, that's a whole
Yeah.
conspiracy.
Yeah.
But
And yeah, like basically I did a lot of, I basically used those shooting scripts as sort of my Rosetta Stones, and then built off of those. And aside from that, also looking into like the larger themes that are explored specifically in like Kong media, like looking at, because I've seen different versions of Kong throughout the years, and of course I've I've seen the 90s Godzilla movie with Matthew Broderick.
Let's
But
go.
yeah, but the sort of thing that I really landed on with Kong, or rather what I was looking for was sort of like, what are the core elements of King Kong? What are the core elements of Kong as a character, both in this universe and in previous ones? How can I pay homage or honor those elements while still making this like its own unique story? And that's what I really tried to do with all of the research I did.
Hmm. So when it comes to writing, when it comes to people who are writing stories, um, I've noticed some like kind of, I guess, techniques that people use is sometimes people just straight up don't watch or absorb any other media because they want this specific version to be entirely their own. So
Mhm.
I'm just curious, did that idea kind of go into your head aside from like MonsterVerse media because you have to keep continuity with the MonsterVerse? Did you was it kind of an idea to avoid any King Kong or Godzilla media to not kind of have your initial vision be maybe tainted by other media, if that makes sense?
No, no, not really. In a lot of ways, like the way I approached this, I wasn't worried about it getting like tainted by anything else, or like, I wasn't worried about it not being its own thing. I think more than anything, what I wanted to do was look at look at what had come before and find the things that made sense to keep, and you know make reasonable what's the word, excisions. So like a big thing that occurred to me in writing Kong is that in most King Kong stories before the Monsterverse, and excluding his appearances in like the Showa era,
Hmm.
like kaiju movies, because that's basically its own completely separate thing, is that
Yeah.
King Kong is, he's a tragic figure because he is destroyed by his contact with humans. And I obviously like I think Kong is a really emotionally resonant character because he's all alone, because he's, this very emotive creature. Like he out of all of the Titans, he looks the most like us, and he's so expressive that it's impossible not to empathize with him. But a big aspect of the Monsterverse that I kind of had to just accept was that, Kong at the end of the day is going to be an ally to humans, whether he is happy about it or not. He doesn't really bear them any ill will. So something that I had to kind of move away from, like with other Kong media, is like, okay, this isn't a story about like man versus beast, and like the tragic, the tragic monster laid low. What is the, 'twas beauty that slayed the beast? It's no, I mean, it's very much more like what I realized that Kong is in this continuity and in this story is someone who fundamentally like has no way of discovering who he is until he's put through like a crucible to do that. Like he doesn't have adult Kongs to emulate. He doesn't have another, like, he doesn't have a quote unquote like normal life for a creature of his species. And he's literally existing in a world that was not made for him. And I found that to be really, really interesting. And I wanted to try to explore that as best I could in the limited space that I could.
Right. So did you like fall into many kind of pitfalls or headaches when deciding how Kong would factor into the plot or story?
Yes and no. Because like the biggest pitfalls I found was that like anytime you write a story like this, it unless you're doing what they did with Godzilla Dominion, which is it's entirely from the monster's perspective, you're always going to have a human element. And the human element was so much more sticky because I had to like kind of make this character not from whole cloth, but like from, I had to like, develop her and introduce her and create this whole backstory for her. Whereas Kong, everybody knows him. And it's
Yeah.
very, the biggest pitfall I would say in writing it is that I, I never wanted it to feel like, meanwhile, back at the ranch, Kong is hanging out. Like I never wanted it to feel like he wasn't doing anything. So
Yeah.
then that really became, and using Houston Brooks as sort of a cipher to sort of explore what Kong is going through was great, because then I was able to really lean into what does it mean for him to be so big on this island? What does it mean for him to basically never be able to stop fighting because
Mhm.
everything is trying to kill him? Um, like leaning into that is what helped me kind of get out of any pitfalls regarding writing him, because yeah, I mean, you're always going to have difficulty writing a character who doesn't speak, doesn't have human morality or motivations. Um, and so like I also didn't want it to be the sort of thing where like I didn't want Kong to just always be the Deus ex machina that saves the humans. Like I like I said, I wanted this to be a story about like collaboration. And I wanted to also set up for eventually, like, you know, Kong befriending Gia, and like I wanted to bring him to a place where he could conceivably be more comfortable with a human as like as a creature that he really relates to versus just creatures that kind of exist near him, you know?
Right. And so because you watched Kong Skull Island, for example, did you kind of keep in mind, I'm not sure if this idea was kind of going through when you were developing the story, but and because of how much Kong does factor into the plot, were you keeping in mind the typical like audience critique that there isn't enough like monster and human screen time when you made this story?
I think like a big thing that I wasn't worried so much about that critique, but what I was worried about is that so in Skull Island, Kong is a lot smaller, and it's definitely the sort, like he does interact with the humans somewhat, but there's, you know, there I'm trying to remember now, like Brie Larson's like, you know, like the size of maybe like one of his fingers, and now he's like triple that size.
Mhm.
And I was the biggest thing was just like he's so much bigger just from like a visual standpoint. How do you put them in the same frame?
Yeah.
You know, that's a big thing when you're writing comics. You have to consider the visuals more, like even more so than the dialogue, because the visuals are what tell the story. And like the big thing that I had to consider was, okay, whenever Kong is on screen, if he's going to be interacting with humans or if humans are going to be nearby, how do I do that in a way that's visually interesting and readable? And that's sort of why he ends up like, that's why Brooks is in the helicopter so much. Um, Ultimately, what I also wanted to do, like, I wanted him and Audrey to sort of be on these parallel roads that eventually converge. And that's also why, like, you don't really, he doesn't like physically touch a human until he catches Audrey, because I wanted that to feel sort of like those two stories finally dovetailing together to, like, you know, encapsulate that core theme that we talked about earlier. And I really loved the idea of her being in the palm of his hand and it being this moment of connection between the two of them.
Right. And it's almost like Kong Skull Island kind of had the safety net of Kong still being, 100 feet tall as opposed to like 300. So, it's like what you brought up with having a human and Kong in the same frame. It's like the real challenge pretty much comes with this kind of story as opposed to um, a Kong that's much smaller, because then you're able to get that human monster connection a little bit more. So
Yeah,
that's really good.
yeah. And yeah, absolutely. And like I think that it's, I like when stories, if you're going to have that big of a size differential, I like stories that lean into that. Like there is something, you know, it would be like trying to talk to a volcano or a tornado, you know, like there's a scene in Godzilla versus Kong where like Madison is like staring into Godzilla's eye, and there's this moment of, because like how, what do you even do, like, you know, he doesn't think the way you do, and yet he affects your life. And I think it's the same kind of that sense of awe and that sense of like connection that I kind of wanted to emulate with Audrey and Kong.
Right. So Let's so leading into more of like Camazotz, because Camazotz is one of my favorite monsters ever. Um, did you come up with the idea for Camazotz or any of his history or mythology?
No, no, that was entirely the mythology team. It was like very much the way that this process worked in the development was um, we kind of had like a placeholder for what the villain was going to be for a while because we were trying to see what we could get the rights to.
Uh-huh.
And then ultimately they were like, okay, we're doing a completely new monster. And this is I mean, I think it's really fun that Legendary now just kind of has their own crop of Titans to pull from. And they had developed the kind of basic concept of Camazotz that, he's a bat Titan. He builds off of the Mayan death bat god. And they sent me like kind of like a little dossier with some bullet points like this is what he is, this is what he does, this is his sort of whole like his motivation is that he hates the sun. And
Right.
they did ask me to like offer up some like some ideas for what he does or like what his powers were, and I threw a bunch of spaghetti at the wall and they did go with a few things. Like I don't think it doesn't show up in the comic itself, but it's in his little like the back matter. It says that he drinks like Titan
Atomic
blood.
Rich. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
A
my
ti-
God. I read that. I was
yeah.
like, that's awesome.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, that was the thing because I was like, oh, well, he's like a vampire bat. Why not? But other things too, like the sonic scream and everything. And the visual is entirely Zid. That was the artist for this book. Zid was the one who did the visual development for
Yeah.
Camazotz, and he's brilliant. I was
Yeah.
so happy to be able to work with him.
That's very cool. Yeah, no, Zid is incredible. I remember actually having a couple conversations with him back in like I want to say 2017 when Kong Skull Island came out, when it was Birth of
Mhm.
Kong. Yeah, we
Mhm.
had a couple conversations and he was really nice and yeah, I think his art is just incredible.
He's
Um
wonderful. He's a delight.
right. That's actually really cool.
Mm.
So from a purely speculative standpoint, do you think there is a chance we can see Camazotz return in a future Kong movie?
I would love that. I really have no idea whether Legendary will trot him out again. If not in a movie, maybe a comic. The nice thing about like I said, this roster of Titans that they have is they have a lot of things they can pull. I personally think he's such a good design. I really hope they use him in a movie or I mean, like again,
Yeah,
this is purely speculation. I have no ins in this
absolutely.
thing, but like
Yeah.
I mean, if they ever were to do like a TV show or a video game or something. He's just so good. I hope they use him again.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Um, so, seeing as to how you wrote such an amazing character for Kong, if the opportunity arose to write for Kong in future entries, whether like on screen or on page, do you see yourself kind of pursuing that?
I mean, I'd love to. That's definitely the sort of thing where like um kaiju stories and like monster stories aren't necessarily what I always go for when I'm looking to write stuff, and especially like my personal stories tend to be a little bit more grounded. But that being said, like if they wanted me to write more, absolutely. Oh my god,
Uh,
absolutely.
that would be awesome. Yeah, that
Yeah.
would be so cool.
Yeah.
Um, Now, I know you really kind of had to adjust to this sort of new world you found yourself in regarding working for Legendary. So, with the creative team placed on the story, did you find that it kind of helped the process or hinder it? Like, did it take some time finding your footing?
It definitely took time finding the footing, because like I've collaborated with people before, but never that many people because
Mhm.
I had my two editors, and I had all of the mythology team, which I actually don't know how many people are on it because I had the one person that I would email and then he would go and talk to them and then they'd come back to me. And then similarly, like I never spoke directly with any of the film team. And so I couldn't even tell you who technically was on the film team because everything came to me through the editors.
Right.
But every treatment that I wrote would have to go through go through editorial, go to the film team, come back to editorial, come back to me. And it was definitely a process of hurry up and wait. I had to wait a lot to hear what they were going to say. Especially during the development, there were a lot of, well, what if we include this? We'll take that out. We're not going to do that anymore. And oh, we don't like that. Oh, there's too many characters now. Take some of them out. And it was a
Uh-huh.
lot of back and forth. Um, it definitely took a while to get my footing. I wouldn't say that it was a hindrance. I think at the end of the day, it's, learning to work with a franchise means that you are going to be working with a lot of different people's like visions for that franchise. And it's your job as a writer to execute that in a way that still feels true to your sensibilities. And I think I did do that because ultimately I was able to tell a story that I felt was emotionally honest.
Hmm.
And I also did something that I think set up for the film. And I hope, I'm glad that that people have said that they feel like it helped set up some concepts for the film. Cause that really, at the end of the day, like the big task that I had was, this is a prequel. It's a prequel to a movie. And, we want this to tie in with that movie. And so, yeah, like really learning to work with those expectations, learning to work with those like different voices. Um, mm, it was challenging, but it was also ultimately rewarding because then I got to see how I work with those kinds of restrictions. You create things you never would have created otherwise,
Hmm.
because you have those parameters.
Yeah. And it's actually kind of funny. Well, this actually might be corny now that I think about it, but it's almost like there's you're kind of leaning into this collaboration and this like effort idea, this kind of theme of trusting other people and being able to work with other people. That's a theme that kind of shadows the story, and it's almost like that's kind of also what went on behind the scenes with you. This is your first experience like with Legendary, and
Mhm.
it's like you're learning um, a lot more about like teamwork and a team effort, and it's like that kind of shined into the story.
Absolutely. And I mean, I don't think it was like I didn't have a moment when I was writing where I was like, oh, this is just like me. But I do think that in working with that collaboration, um, I think like it was on my mind, like
Mhm.
definitely thinking about, opening your like opening yourself up to other people, um, and not doubting yourself. I think that is absolutely something that was on my mind and was kind of a through line in writing this. And I'm grateful too that when I sort of approached them and said like this is what I want to do with this, I want there to be this theme of like collaboration and empathy, that they were like, yeah, that sounds great. That sounds perfect. They were very game. So I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's amazing to hear that you're able to like adapt so quickly, and you're able to like craft such a unique vision for the story in such little time. I mean, that's no small feat by any stretch of the imagination.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, and actually, because I'm such a big like monster fan, I've seen every Godzilla movie, every King Kong movie, like back to back, and I like that earlier you brought up that you wanted to tell a story that's very emotionally honest. That was a
Mhm.
very great way of putting it. So yeah, I think that would be really I think this genre kind of needs more of those stories, especially if you consider like um just how like we as humans what we seem to go through every day. I feel like it was just so refreshing. It was like a breath of fresh air in this franchise.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I think I find in general that when I see movies like this where you have these larger than life, whether it's a giant monster or any kind of like science fiction conceit, um the fastest way to lose me is to sort of do the kind of wincing wink at the camera and be like, "Oh, we know this is stupid." And it's like,
yeah.
"No, I am here to like experience something cathartic." And I think that like telling these stories from a place of emotion and empathy, I think is the best way to do it. Like I know that this is a separate Legendary property, but I loved the original Pacific Rim movie, and that movie is just dripping with sincerity and emotion.
Yeah.
And I think like that's when you have these kind of outlandish settings, you have to double down on the stuff that is most relatable.
Hmm. Yes, and that is why you're the perfect choice for a future Kong
Ah,
entry.
thank you
um,
so much.
in case Legendary is listening, but I highly. Um, so here's a question. I'm gonna kind of try to speed through because I don't want to
That's
hold you
okay.
up too long. Um,
Thank you.
when you're writing for a character who's pre-existing throughout the MonsterVerse, like Houston Brooks, and I guess
Wow.
you can say Kong, but mainly with
Mhm.
Houston Brooks. How did you find new places to take his character and his story arc? Because he's older within the
Mhm.
timeline. So how did you kind of find, yeah, new places to evolve that character?
It was really fun, actually. Like at first I was sort of perplexed because I was like, well, how do I like he's in his 70s. Why is he still here? Like, why is he still on this island? It's so dangerous.
I
But
know.
when I really like kind of sat with the reality that like this is a man who his entire life, his entire career has just revolved around this island, revolved around Kong. Like, he's literally married to the woman who was like on the team with him when they went to Skull Island the first time in the 70s. And like, his son got lost there. And, he's just I wanted to explore Brooks at this time in his life where it's kind of he's closing the book on
Mhm.
that, like where he's finally realizing like I can't keep doing this, which is kind of sad. But I wanted to like I- I've always liked old man characters who like are really trying not to admit how old they are and then kind of have to come to terms with it, which and I definitely I had fun writing him because I got to throw in these little like he makes Star Trek jokes, and of course nobody gets them because they're all just
Yeah.
like young people in their 20s and they have no idea what he's talking about. Um and like really kind of leaning into the fact that he's in this honestly like I'm saying this and I'm only just realizing it now, but in the same way that like Kong and Audrey are sort of treating themselves like these lone islands, he's doing the same thing. He's like, I'm the one who has to decide everything. I'm the one who can figure out what's happening with the storm and everything.
Mhm.
And then ultimately that ends up backfiring because of course isn't he ultimately is why they drill into the cave, and he feels guilty about that. And like exploring him reckoning with that at the end of the book actually was really interesting and rewarding because there is like kind of a bittersweetness to that like this is how that chapter of his life is going to end, that like Skull Island is irreparably changed.
Mhm.
That was really interesting to explore.
Yeah, no, and it definitely it was executed really well. Yeah, so for some fans of this story, the ending regarding Camazotz' fate seems a bit ambiguous. So my question is, did Camazotz die at the end of the story? Was he knocked
No.
back into the Hollow Earth? Oh no, he didn't.
No, he's alive. No, I wanted there to be some ambiguity in the sense that like maybe he could come back, or maybe Kong could encounter him in the Hollow Earth again, or maybe he gets his own spin-off or something, then I get to write it and make lots and lots of money. But but no, like he is alive, and yeah, the that shot is Kong basically like with the sheer force of his throw just sending him back into the Hollow Earth. But no, he's battered and bruised, but he is still alive.
I see. Well, that answers one major question that a lot of fans have had.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So here's another fan question, but in
Hmm.
this story, we have a Kong who's much larger than he was prior to this story, and yeah, there's been some speculation amongst fans regarding if Kong is fully grown in the story or not, because the story takes place in 2019 and Godzilla vs Kong is in 2024. So yeah, is Kong fully grown and in his prime in this story, or do you think he has much more growing to do and reaches his full growth by Godzilla vs Kong?
What I can definitely say is that by when I was given these sort of like brief about like where Kong is in his timeline, he is fully grown. Like this is I don't know if it's as big as he'll ever get. That's up to the mythology department. But
Hmm.
but he basically is the size that he is in Godzilla versus Kong. Um yeah, like that was something where I was given some parameters in regards to like how big he is. But basically the idea was like, again, we're setting up for Godzilla versus Kong. We want to introduce him like, he's even larger now.
Hmm.
And so I mean, if you like maybe the answer would be different if you were able to get like the mythology team on the phone and then they were like, oh well, he's grown exactly like 15 millimeters. But I think basically where I was writing it from is he is the size that he is in Godzilla versus Kong.
Definitely. So here's a quick question that I do have. When you were writing this story, I guess, or you could say when you were preparing for it,
Mhm.
did you ever kind of speak with other writers of MonsterVerse media to get an idea of how you would kind of go about this story?
No, actually. I mean, my main contacts were the editorial team. They didn't put me in touch even with the writers for the Godzilla story. It was very interesting because um this kind of work is it's work for hire. So that means that, like, I work on the book, and then unless they want to bring me on for something else, like, my involvement is done.
Uh-huh.
So there was no point in which I was reaching out to other writers of the property, mainly because if I had any questions, the mythology team would get me answers. What I will say, that might be like kind of a more satisfying question, is because Zid had worked on one of these books before. I didn't necessarily go to him with thoughts about the writing, but I was able to go to him more about like the process. Like, we talked, once he got involved, we talked pretty frequently about like what we wanted it to be, what we felt about like the characters and the feel of it. And that was really wonderful because we're like, having that kind of collaboration and that kind of communication with your artist is so important, because not only are they like bringing your writing to life, but you also want to make sure that they're getting to express themselves as an artist.
Right.
And so like working with him helped really make this book what it is.
Uh-huh. So so kind of leaning back into uh the the Camazotz questions.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, because also a lot of other fans were wondering, but
Mm-hmm.
how did, because you're the writer of the story, how do you think Kong and Camazotz compare in strength?
This is interesting because I do get I will sometimes get questions like on Twitter and stuff, where people are like, how many metric tons do you think Kong's punch is? And I
Oh
don't
my
have an
God.
answer for that. But what I can say is that, like, I always feel that people phrase the question wrong, who's stronger? Because at the end of the day, like, a fight between anyone is not just a factor of strength, it's a factor of speed and tactical advantage and terrain. And I mean, this is purely conjecture, and and may legendary strike me down if I'm wrong. I think that, like, Kong, I think, is physically stronger. I think that if they were to like do one of those circus things where you hit the thing and the thing goes up
Yeah, the
now.
hammer.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think Kong is physically stronger, in part because like he has arms. But Camazotz obviously is like, he has all of these advantages. And something that I wanted to, in this fight, to really play with is like, I didn't want it to just be like, oh, Kong showed up and he saved the day and everything's great. Like, I wanted it to feel tense. I wanted it to feel like he could really lose,
Right.
because he's never fought anything with like an aerial advantage of this size before. Like, he's never fought an Alpha Titan before. Camazotz also has like powers. He has like, a sonic scream and all of these elements that, in that moment with that terrain, Kong is not able to get the upper hand. And obviously, like, once he does, he's able to win because he's so strong.
Right.
Um, but I also think, like, for example, if they were to like to face off again, Kong is also very smart and very crafty. And I think that were they to meet again, he would have more ideas of how to bring Camazotz down to his level. Because that's another big thing. I tried to make it clear in writing that fight that, what Camazotz keeps doing is he's kind of fighting dirty, that he's like picking Kong up and dropping him. This
Right.
isn't like a one-on-one fight where they're punching each other.
Hmm. So do you think
So
Kong would have lost that fight without the help of Audrey and her fleet?
I think so, in those circumstances. I mean, now that being said, if the editors came back to me and they were like, Audrey and her fleet can't be there, it has to be just Kong versus Camazotz, I'm like, well, then he's gonna win that fight. But but in all seriousness, like, in the like within the thing that I wrote, yeah, no, the whole point is that basically he cannot win alone, and
Uh-huh.
and Audrey and her team helping him is indicative of the fact that there is honor in accepting help.
Right. Um, Yeah, no, that's an excellent theme that we love to see in the Monsterverse. But one question I had, because Camazotz is
Mhm.
such like a favorite monster to me, like I'm
Mhm.
telling you, like this monster just shot up to like nearly number one. It's
Mhm.
astounding. One question I was kind of confused on
Mhm.
the threat that he posed to everybody, and
Mhm.
I'm just curious because like yeah, we're met with like quotes like a darkness will swallow the world, or like
Mhm.
he'll enshroud the earth in permanent midnight. And I'm just curious,
Mhm.
what ways would he do this? I was kind of
So
confused on that.
no, that's okay. I understand. Like that's something where again,
Like the mythology department.
well, so some of that is the mythology department, like him wanting to like put the world into permanent darkness and all of that. That was something that the mythology department brought to me. The way that I tried to use this in the book, and the way I tried to like seed it throughout the story, it's been established in Birth of Kong that there are people in this world who have like prophetic visions and can see into the past, and that the Iwi also have this like long mythological history dating back to when like Kong's family existed on the island and like this sort of prehistoric period. So what I tried to do in the writing of this and in the prophecy that's foretelling Camazotz, I was trying to write from the perspective of an Iwi experiencing this vision, seeing this storm overhead, seeing Camazotz sort of reigning supreme over Skull Island. Um, I think like so to clarify too, the storm is a byproduct of King Ghidorah, who is not earthly. He is from outer space.
Mm-hmm.
And the storm is anchored to Skull Island by the vile vortex, by the entrance into the hollow earth. And Camazotz is using that as a way to come out during the day.
Right.
And so this is a confluence of things happening that, Camazotz is taking advantage of rather than necessarily like being the reason that the storm is there. As far as like what he like, if he'd killed Kong and taken over Skull Island and like murdered all of the people there, my guess is he probably then would have started advancing to other places. And similar to it's been established that like there are alpha titans and other titans will sort of work in tandem with them. I think then it would have become maybe not necessarily the same as King Ghidorah, but I think you would have had like another titan, like a destructive titan, trying to supersede Godzilla and sort of like claim ownership over the earth. And that
Mm-hmm.
was sort of my take on it.
That's really interesting. Um, yeah. Okay. So that's really cool. God, I love that monster so much.
I'm
um,
really glad.
so here's a question.
Mhm.
I First of all, I absolutely adore the final battle. I think it's
Mhm.
one of the best looking that we've seen in a lot of kaiju media. And I just like the color palette, and
Mhm.
it's like vibrant, and there's these purples and grays. They look really nice. And my question is, did you have any input on how the final battle would look? Like, did you have any like um was that kind of your idea regarding the illustrations or the artistic direction?
That's all Zid. Obviously like I have some like when I write out my script, I will usually like kind of give a feel for the pacing. And if there's like very specific ways that I want the panels to look or something, I'll say that. But when it comes to color, when it comes to, like I think the way I described it was it's a big storm. Like the art and the execution is very much Zid and just his brilliant artistic style.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. So we talked about Godzilla earlier and
Mm-hmm.
how Godzilla kind of had his own graphic novel, and
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if, much like the question with Kong,
Mm-hmm.
if the opportunity arose to write for Godzilla, either in a film or a future graphic novel, do you see yourself taking that opportunity?
Oh God, I would love that. Honestly, like if I had that opportunity, God, I would love to write for film. Um, and yeah, like I mean, I'd certainly would not sneer, I wouldn't sneer at writing for Godzilla. I think like the big thing for me is that, it's in an ideal situation where I had like total creative freedom. I think I would go in a much more like kind of avant-garde direction. Like I want to do like the A24 Godzilla film. Like, I want this to
Mm-hmm.
be about like um like 13th century peasants catching glimpses of Godzilla and stuff like that. Like that would be my sort of thing. Like I'm very interested in exploring like the day-to-day life of people living in a world with giant monsters. Um and that's something that like I would love to explore that kind of like much more, again, because I'm so interested in marrying the human element to the monster element, like finding ways to explore quieter monster stories. But that being said, if they said to me, Marie, you're writing the next Godzilla book and he's going to fight four monsters at once, I'd be like, yeah, let's do it. Come on.
Yeah.
Which monsters are they? Let's do it. I'm gonna, I'm gonna create. He's gonna get a chain whip at some point. That's how we're gonna do this. So
Yeah.
yeah, no,
That-
absolutely, I'd love to.
So we talked about Godzilla versus Kong earlier, and I was
Mhm.
just wondering, did you enjoy Godzilla versus Kong and where they took Kong's character?
I did actually. Yeah, I think like because I read the script before writing the book, and then I lived in that book and I lived in that like kind of mentality for a while. And then like, seeing the film and seeing the execution of it. Yeah, like it was so fun. And I think like what I really love that about it is like it's exactly what you want from a monster team up. It's like they're fighting and then they come together to fight the larger threat. And it has a very kind of satisfying like that there's no other way to put it. It's just like that satisfying, like badass feel of it's like, oh yeah, my two favorites are friends now. So yeah, like no, I did enjoy it. I thought it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So this is more of like a fun question, but
Hmm.
who do you think would win in this fight? Camazotz or Rodan? Who do you put your money
Rodan.
on? Yeah.
Rodan, totally. This is I've said this in so like in the like handful of interviews that I've done. Like I'm a big Rodan fan. That's actually like the big secret is that if I had the chance to write a Rodan book, I would love that. Because I love flying monsters. I love
Uh-huh.
that he has like lava powers, and just from a practical perspective, Camazotz is light sensitive.
Yeah, I was
He
about to
can't
say,
hand
yeah.
yeah, he can't handle sunlight, and Rodan is literally on fire. Um, I mean, I think it would be a really cool battle, and I'd love to see it play out, but I think Rodan would win.
Hmm. Are you more of a Kong fan or a Godzilla fan?
At this point, a Kong fan. I feel like I feel an affinity for him because I wrote him because like I have my name on this story and I had to like live in his head for a while.
Hmm.
I don't dislike Godzilla, but I think between the two, I find Kong so rich to explore as a character because he's so sad and expressive. And like Godzilla, I think, is so removed and so unknowable because of just what he is. I feel
Right.
like no matter what, I'm always going to sort of default to Kong because I feel like I can understand him more.
Hmm. Now we talked about earlier that you've sort of you watched even before you got this gig,
Hmm.
you've seen a couple King Kong and Godzilla films,
Hmm.
and then you kind of re-upped on that as
Hmm.
you started developing the story. Did you have any particular favorite King Kong or Godzilla movie?
Mm, if I had to pick, I mean, like the originals, like the very beginning ones, are so fun because, like, from just a cinematic standpoint, they're the first to have done them.
Hmm.
Um, and I think like if I was going to just choose one that I think like best marries the things I like, I do think Kong Skull Island does that because I think it has such a great aesthetic. I think it's got a really fun story. Um and I think it's just it does exactly what it says on the tin. It is a really solid Kong movie and it's got great performances.
Hmm.
And yeah, and a good soundtrack too. So yeah, like that one I think.
Right. We're pretty much nearing the end of this interview. I feel bad for holding you up so long.
You're fine. You're fine. I love talking about this stuff is the thing.
Yeah, no, me too. So last couple questions. Um,
Uh-huh.
Throughout the story, there are a lot of references and Easter eggs to people who have worked on past King Kong movies. I noticed we have like characters like Nomura, Privates
Mhm.
Wallace and Cooper, Delgado, basically all these famous names of some extraordinary people who've helped shape King Kong into the cinematic icon that he is, but this was all behind the scenes.
Mhm.
My question is, were these name drops and Easter eggs your idea to implement into the story?
That's all me. Yeah, in a lot of ways, like I always love a good Easter egg, and when it comes to stuff like this, where you're going to have a bunch of secondary characters who are important enough that they have a scene or several lines of dialogue. Like I hate it when characters are just like nameless, faceless, boring characters. I want to, at the very least, even if I'm not going to get their whole backstory, I want to feel like they're people, and
Mhm.
I want to be scared if they're going to die, you know. So in the process of coming up with these characters, I was just like, well, I need names for them. Oh, this will be a really fun little Easter egg. And I like, you know, I looked up the names and I threw those in. And then like on a, you know, on a kind of flip side personal note, like there are a handful of characters in this who are named after my friends. Like I named a handful of people like on Audrey's team after friends of mine who love Godzilla and love monster movies. And I was just like, you know, this is my send up to them.
Wow, I did not know that. That's actually really cool.
Yeah.
Man. So, the ending to this story is absolutely beautiful. You know, I love the way you capped off Audrey's story. Do you think she could perhaps have a continued story in future Monsterverse entries, or do you think her story kind of ends here at Kingdom Kong?
I would hope so. It's definitely the sort of thing where if her story ended here, I wouldn't be sad about it. I think that I was very happy with how it ended. I'm very grateful that I got to put that ending in there. Not it wasn't so much that there was a question that it wouldn't be, but more that when I submitted the script and I was like, you know, if they tell me that it's too sappy, I'll be really sad. And that wasn't the case at all. I was very happy that I got to give Audrey that closure. But that being said, like if they wanted to use her, I would be thrilled. I think she's such a fun, rich character. I'd love to see her come back. You know, I really, you know, it's one of those things where they have so many, they have such a big cast of like human characters that they can use. Like, I would certainly hope she'd, you know, if they were looking to bring someone back, I hope that she would be in consideration.
Hmm. And here's the final question. I
Mm-hmm.
read that you grew up here in SoCal, which is actually where I'm. I grew up. You know, I'm here right now. It's awesome here.
Yeah.
So, so Marie,
Mm-hmm.
honestly,
Mm-hmm.
was the appearance of an In and Out intentional on your part?
Yes. I'm
Yeah.
so happy you noticed.
Yeah, no, I immediately know. I was like, is that an In and Out? I swear to God.
Yes. No. Oh my God. I'm so happy. Oh man. Yeah. So yeah, I am an Orange County girl. That's where I was born and raised. And yeah, like in fleshing out Audrey's character and trying to like find the little human touches to make her relatable and also to like cement her relationship with Tam because that is such a fundamental part of who she is and a fundamental part of her story. Um, a way that I realized I could make her feel like sort of lived in was to draw from my own experiences. So like, yeah, she's from Southern California. That's an In and Out. I remember when
Nice.
what I wrote it into the script and I was thinking to myself, like, Zid lives in Malaysia. What are the chances that he's ever been to an In and Out?
Yeah.
And I kind of gave him an out in the script. I said they're in an In and Out or an equally beachy burger restaurant. And then he sends the page with them in the In and Out, and it's so perfect that I burst into tears when I saw it because it was like seeing what was in my head perfectly laid out.
Yeah.
It is genuine. I've been asked before, what's your favorite page in the book? And that is my absolute favorite page. I'm so happy you caught
Yeah,
that.
no. I mean, what better way to show two characters kind of growing than have them, chomping on a animal style, you know?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
awesome. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm so glad. Yeah, that's a shout out to all my Cali fans. And I
Yeah.
this is also this is again this is basically conjecture, but the whole thing at the beginning, you know, in Audrey's flashback where Camazotz has appeared over Southern California, my whole thing was like, oh, he just came out of the San Andreas fault, obviously.
Hmm. That's
which I can't.
awesome.
That's me saying that. That's not necessarily canon, but that was my. I'm
Yeah.
just like, well, worse things have come out of the San Andreas Fault. So
Of course.
yeah, but yeah, no,
Well,
that's. I'm
Marie,
so glad.
yeah, Marie, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy week for this interview. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it and just how much of an honor it is to have somebody who's worked on a King Kong story to answer some questions, So and it
Thank
was
you
my
so
first.
much for having. You
Yeah, no,
first.
no,
You
no.
first.
Thank you. No, 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 no. I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time, It was my first interview and thank you for bearing with me. Yeah, you were amazing.
Thank you so much. No, thank you for having me. This was a wonderful interview. Don't worry about it being your first. You are a fantastic interviewer, and I hope to hear more of them from your channel. And thank you so much for liking the book and for having me on. This has been so lovely.
Thank you so much. Do you have any closing thoughts, any projects you're working on, anything you want to plug?
Right now, you can always check my website, marianello.com, for any upcoming things. Obviously, a lot of my performance stuff is limited to New York, but I'm developing a cabaret right now that'll be going up in June and that I hope to have live streamed. And then as far as writing stuff, um, nothing coming out yet, but I have a lot of things that are sort of in their development stage that I'm really hoping to bring out in the next handful of years because comics take forever. But yeah, anybody who's interested in seeing what I'm doing can always check out my website. And yeah, just my closing thoughts are thank you so much, Amir, for being so lovely. Thank you for loving my book. And to everybody who's listening to this, thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, the incredibly talented Miss Marie Anello. And Marie, I truly hope to see you return to write for King Kong again. That would be, you did a magnificent job writing for Kong and Audrey and Houston. So, yeah, I would love to see what you can do in the writer's room for another King Kong film.
Thank
But,
you. I would love that. That would be incredible.
yeah, well, thank you so much, Marie. It was an honor, it was a privilege, and I wish you the best in your life and your career. Thank you so
Same to
much, Marie.
you. Thank you. Thank you so much and have a great night.
Thank you, you too.
Bye.
And there you have it, everybody. Writer of Kingdom Kong, Miss Marie Anello. She was so nice and friendly, and she was super understanding, and what a talented person. Be sure to check out her website and her future projects. I am so grateful to be given this opportunity to interview her, because this was my first time ever conducting an interview. And thank you guys so much for bearing with me and being patient, especially Marie. And with that, this is a great way to kick off a couple new series I had in the works where I would basically be interviewing creators within the kaiju community, ranging from people who've worked in the industry, to fans who are content creators, to even those who are viewers. So these kinds of interviews would be in a series called Creator Spotlight. And I'm also going to have another series called Animator Spotlight. It's the same exact thing, but it's specifically geared towards animators of kaiju media. I'm really excited to have more people on so we can all get to know each other and really just connect the community even further. So, that being said, I hope you all enjoyed. Please don't forget to check out Marie's future projects and her website. It'll be down below. And yeah, please subscribe for more. This is King Kong 9100, signing out. I love you all so much, and until next time, bye-bye.